The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could crush you. My mother's face hardened in a way that made me feel like I was a stranger. Don't be selfish, Helena. Family is everything. You've always been the strong one. Why can't you share just a little for your sister's happiness? And there it was, the old refrain, the familiar guilt they'd always wrapped me in like barbed wire. Only this time it cut too deep to ignore. I left the house shaking, clutching the garment bag with my dress back in it, my vision blurred with tears. I thought about my fiancé, about how he had no idea what I was walking into every time I visited my family. I thought about how my parents had never once asked me what I wanted, not as a child, not as a teenager, not even now, when I was supposed to be starting a new life. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe my entire role in this family had been a lie, because maybe I wasn't the understanding sister. Maybe I was just the sacrifice. I didn't go home that night. I drove aimlessly for hours, the dress sitting like a ghost in the passenger seat, until I finally parked in an empty lot and just sobbed. The kind of sobbing that comes from a wound you've ignored for too long, raw, shaking, uncontrollable. It wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about every moment I had been told my feelings were too much, my wants too small, my voice unworthy. It was about realizing that even my wedding, the one day I thought could belong to me, was being stolen and twisted into another performance for Celia. I didn't tell my fiancé Mark right away. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't know how to put the madness into words. How do you explain to someone who grew up in a normal, loving family that your parents think it's reasonable to make your sister a co-bride at your own wedding? I was afraid he wouldn't believe me, or worse, that he would think I was overreacting the way my parents always claimed. So I carried it alone for a few days, replaying the scene in my head until it became unbearable. When I finally told him, Mark's face went pale. He reached for my hands and said, "Helena, this isn't normal. This isn't love. Your wedding day is about us, not about them." His words should have comforted me, but they also cracked something open. Because as much as I wanted to believe him, I knew that for my parents, my wedding had never been about me. It was just another stage to showcase Celia. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were torture. My parents kept calling, sending messages laced with guilt and subtle threats. "If you don't let your sister share this moment, you'll regret it. Family will think you're cruel. Celia already ordered matching shoes. Do you really want to break her heart?" At one point, my father even told me, "If you push her out, don't expect us to show up either." That one cut deeper than anything else. The thought of walking down the aisle without my parents there to witness it made my stomach churn. But at the same time, what they were asking of me felt like a death sentence. I couldn't sacrifice myself again, not on this. Then something happened that twisted the knife even deeper. My cousin, who had always been close to Celia, called me one night. Her voice was hushed, nervous, like she knew she was betraying someone by speaking. "Helena," she whispered, "I don't know if you know this, but your mom's been telling people that Celia will be walking down the aisle too. Like, as a co-bride. They're calling it a sister ceremony. They've been planning it for months. They even printed invitations for their friends with both your names on them." I thought my cousin was exaggerating. Until she sent me a photo. And there it was, an elegant cream-colored card with scripted lettering that read, "You are joyfully invited to the wedding ceremony of Helena and Mark, and her sister Celia, celebrating family love and unity." My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped my phone. My name, my wedding, reduced to a backdrop for Celia's spotlight. They hadn't just dreamed it, they had made it real. That was the night rage replaced grief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just sad about what they were doing to me. I was furious. Years of being quiet, of being the understanding one, evaporated in an instant. I wanted to burn it all down, to rip the mask off this twisted play they'd written for me. I confronted my mother the next day, voice shaking but loud. "How dare you? How dare you take my wedding and make it about Celia? How dare you invite people under false pretenses?" Her response? Cold, sharp, dripping with disdain. "You've always been selfish, Helena. You think this day is just about you, but marriage is about family. If you can't see that, maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family anymore." And that was the moment I realized the truth I had been running from my whole life. It was never about family. It was about control, about keeping me small, about feeding Celia's need for adoration while I disappeared quietly into the background. And if I didn't fight back now, I would be erased completely. So I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to let them destroy my wedding. I wasn't going to let Celia take this from me. If my parents wanted to play games, then so be it. I would show them that the understanding sister they thought they had broken was finally gone. I started by pulling the people I trusted closest into my circle. Mark, of course, and my maid of honor, Grace, who had known me since high school. Telling Grace the whole truth felt like lancing a wound, ugly, painful, but necessary. She listened without interrupting, her eyes wide with disbelief, until she finally said, "Helena, this isn't just unfair. It's abusive. You can't let them do this to you anymore." The word abusive sat heavy in my chest. I had never dared to use it, even in my darkest thoughts, because it felt too big, too damning. But once it was spoken aloud, I couldn't unhear it. My parents hadn't just been unfair or misguided. They had manipulated and broken me for years under the guise of family loyalty. And now they wanted to make the final theft on the day I was supposed to start my own family. Grace helped me come up with a plan. We decided not to confront them again, not directly at least. My parents thrived on drama, on spinning every argument into a story where I was the villain. If I gave them another fight, they would twist it into evidence of my cruelty. Instead, I would quietly reclaim my power. The first step was securing the wedding itself. I called the venue manager in tears, explaining that under no circumstances was anyone except me and Mark allowed to stand at the altar. I gave them strict instructions. If my sister tried to walk down the aisle in white, they were to stop her. Then I quietly updated my guest list. Anyone who had received one of those fraudulent invitations got a message directly from me, clarifying the truth. "This is mine and Mark's wedding," I wrote. "If you received anything that suggested otherwise, please know it was done without my consent." I braced for judgment, but what I received was support. Several relatives even confessed they had thought it strange when they saw Celia's name on the card. "We knew something wasn't right," one aunt told me, "but we didn't want to say anything." Still, I couldn't shake the dread. Every night I lay awake imagining Celia storming the aisle, my parents staging some scene to humiliate me. I thought about canceling everything, eloping with Mark in secret, but he took my face in his hands and said, "No, this is our day. Don't let them steal it. Not again." And then the week before the wedding, the final blow came. Celia showed up at my apartment unannounced, wearing a silky white gown. Not my dress this time, but something new, glittering, dramatic, designed to turn heads. She twirled in my doorway as if she were starring in some pageant and said, "Surprise! Don't worry, it's not your exact dress. But now we can both be brides. Isn't that sweet?" Something inside me snapped. For years, I had let her laughter, her flippancy, dismiss my pain. But that day, I saw her for what she really was. Not just a spoiled younger sister, but someone who thrived on my erasure, who took joy in my suffering. My hands shook, but my voice was steady when I said, "Celia, if you show up in white at my wedding, you will not be allowed in. Do you understand me?" Not as my sister, not as a guest, not at all. For the first time, I saw her mask crack. Her smile faltered, and her eyes darkened with something sharp, almost venomous. "You think you can cut me out?" she hissed. "You've always been nothing without me. You'll regret this, Helena." After she stormed out, I sat on the floor, trembling, the echo of her words clawing at me. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a strange, burning clarity. She was wrong. I wasn't nothing without her. I had built a life, a love, a future, despite everything my family had tried to take from me. And this wedding was my chance to prove it. The day of the ceremony arrived like a storm. I was nervous, yes, but also oddly calm, like a soldier marching onto a battlefield, knowing the fight was inevitable. As I stepped into my gown, the real gown, mine and mine alone, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made, every time I had swallowed my voice. This was the moment all of it came to an end. I won't pretend I didn't shake when I saw my parents arrive, stiff and unsmiling. I won't pretend my stomach didn't drop when I caught sight of Celia at the back of the room, wearing that glittering gown despite my warning. But then I looked at Mark waiting for me at the altar, his eyes steady and full of love. And I knew I wasn't the understanding sister anymore. I was a woman standing in her own truth. And I was ready for whatever storm was coming. The music began, low and trembling, the kind that always makes you feel like your chest is too small for your heart. I held my bouquet so tightly my knuckles turned white, but when I stepped into the aisle, I forced myself to breathe. All I could see was Mark at the end, his shoulders squared, his smile soft and steady like an anchor. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. But then I caught the movement, Celia. She was rising from her seat near the back, her gown glittering like a second sun, her chin tilted high with defiance. She was clutching something. Was it flowers? and she began stepping forward, timing her walk to the same rhythm as mine. A murmur spread through the guests, confusion rippling like water. My heart stopped. This was it. The nightmare I had been dreading. I froze mid-step. All eyes darted between us. The bride and the imposter, two sisters in white walking the same aisle. My father actually smiled, as though this had been the plan all along, and my mother dabbed her eyes dramatically. And in that instant, something inside me broke free. I dropped the bouquet. The sound of it hitting the floor startled the silence. Then I spoke, not a scream, not a whisper, but a voice that was finally unmistakably mine. "Stop!" Celia halted, blinking at me like I had spoiled her game. "Helena, what are you?" "This is my wedding." My voice shook, but it grew louder with every word. "Not yours, not Mom's, not Dad's, mine. And if you can't respect that, then you need to leave. Right now." Gasps filled the air. I saw relatives shift uncomfortably, others staring at Celia with shock. For the first time, the spotlight turned harshly on her, not in admiration, but in judgment. Celia's face contorted, her mask cracking wide open. "You ungrateful bitch," she spat, her voice venomous enough to make a few guests flinch. "After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, you think you're better than me? You'll never be better than me." And then she did something I will never forget. She lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of my veil, trying to yank it from my head. The entire room erupted. Chairs scraped, voices shouted. My aunt rushed forward to pull Celia back, and in the chaos, my father stood and bellowed, "Let her go. This is what family is about, sharing the spotlight." But the crowd wasn't with them anymore. They had seen too much. My veil hung askew, my chest heaving, and in that moment, I realized the truth had finally spilled out into the open. No one could pretend anymore. Not them, not me. Mark was at my side in an instant, shielding me, his voice calm but firm. "Enough! Security!" And like a scene from someone else's life, two venue staff appeared and gently but firmly escorted Celia out, her shrieking echoing through the hall. My parents followed her, sputtering about family betrayal and public humiliation, but their words fell flat against the murmurs of disapproval from the guests. When the doors finally shut behind them, a heavy silence fell. My face burned, tears pricked at my eyes, but I stood tall. "I'm sorry," I said to the room, my voice trembling but clear. "I'm sorry you had to see that." Today isn't about drama. It's about love. And I refuse to let anyone take that away from me. A pause. Then, slowly, applause began. First Grace, then my aunt, then more and more until the room was filled with it, a sound that washed over me like a balm. For the first time in my life, people were choosing me. The ceremony continued, not perfect, not seamless, but real. When I said my vows, my voice cracked with emotion because those words weren't just for Mark, they were a vow to myself. To never again surrender my life for someone else's script, to never again let my voice be swallowed. Afterward, at the reception, people whispered their support. Some relatives admitted they had always seen the favoritism, but never dared to speak. "You were so brave," one cousin told me. "I don't know how you carried it all these years." And yet, despite the validation, I couldn't escape the heaviness in my chest. My parents had left without a word. My sister dragged out screaming. Part of me grieved, not for them, but for the family I had wished I had, the family I kept trying to believe in. It was like attending a funeral for something that had never really existed. That night, when the music faded and the hall emptied, Mark and I sat alone at our table, the remnants of the day around us. He took my hand and whispered, "You were incredible. You saved yourself." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to soak in the triumph, but all I felt was the ache of years wasted trying to be what they demanded, and the strange, quiet relief that it was finally, irreversibly over. In the days after the wedding, the silence from my family was deafening. No congratulatory calls, no polite text messages, nothing but the echo of the doors slamming behind them when they stormed out. At first, I thought they were giving me time to come to my senses, the way they always had when I resisted them before. But a week passed, then 2, then 3, and the silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. I heard from an aunt that my parents were spinning the story their way, telling anyone who would listen that I had humiliated them in public, that I had turned my wedding into a spectacle of selfishness. They claimed Celia had only wanted to be part of my big day, and that I had cruelly cast her aside. Some relatives distanced themselves, too uncomfortable to pick sides. Others, though, reached out quietly, telling me they admired my courage. Still, it hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. There were moments when I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had overreacted. If maybe, just maybe, I should have let Celia walk beside me to keep the peace. But then I remembered the look on her face when she tried to rip off my veil, the venom in her words, the years of being erased in my own family. And I knew the truth. Peace had never really been mine to keep. It had always been their peace, their control, their story. Mark held me through those nights, whispering that I had saved myself. And slowly, I began to believe him. I began to realize that what I had done wasn't selfish at all. It was survival. Months later, when the dust had barely settled, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address, just my name written in my mother's precise handwriting. Inside was a letter, pages long, dripping with guilt and accusation. "You've broken this family apart," she wrote. "Celia hasn't been the same since you shamed her. We raised you better than this, Helena. One day you'll regret pushing us away." I read it once, then I tore it into shreds, because the truth was, they hadn't raised me better. They had raised me to disappear. To silence myself, to bleed for Celia's comfort, to swallow my own needs until there was nothing left. And for years I had obeyed, but not anymore. I began therapy soon after. For the first time, I had a space where I could unravel the knots of my past without judgment, without being told I was dramatic or selfish. I cried through the first sessions, the kind of crying that felt like it came from a little girl still trapped inside me. My therapist looked at me gently and said, "Helena, you've been living in survival mode your whole life. What you did at your wedding wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of liberation." That word, liberation, changed something in me. I began to see my story not as one of shame, but as one of reclaiming. Every boundary I set, every time I said no, every time I chose myself, it was another link in the chain breaking free. Celia, of course, didn't stop. She posted cryptic messages on social media about sisters who betray you and weddings ruined by jealousy. Friends would send me screenshots, but I learned to stop looking. Her world thrived on drama, on keeping the spotlight fixed firmly on her. I refused to feed it anymore. And yet, there were moments, quiet, aching moments, when I wondered if I had lost everything. Family dinners, holidays, the sense of belonging I had chased all my life. I would see mothers and daughters laughing together in cafes, sisters arm in arm at weddings, and feel a pang so deep it nearly doubled me over. Why couldn't I have had that? Why did my family have to be a battlefield instead of a refuge? The answer was both simple and devastating, because they chose it to be, and I couldn't choose for them. I could only choose for myself. The first anniversary of my wedding came with a kind of bittersweet triumph. Mark and I celebrated quietly, just the two of us, dancing in our living room to the same song that had played when I walked down the aisle. At one point, I leaned my head against his chest and whispered, "Do you think I'll ever stop hurting?" He kissed the top of my head and said, "Hurting means you cared. Healing means you finally care about yourself more." And I realized he was right. The ache was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It was part of me, yes, but it was no longer the whole story. I don't know if my parents and sister will ever be part of my life again. Maybe one day there will be an apology, a reckoning, a fragile bridge built over the wreckage. Or maybe there won't. Maybe the silence will stretch on forever. What I do know is this. For the first time in 27 years, I am not the understanding sister. I am Helena, a woman who chose herself, a woman who took back her voice. And if there's one thing I want anyone who hears my story to take away, it's this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to the people who raised you. Sometimes the deepest act of love is the one you give yourself. If my story touched you, if you've ever felt silenced or erased in your own family, know that you are not alone. Please share this video so others can hear it. Leave a comment if you've lived something similar, and subscribe for more stories like this. Let's build a space where voices like ours can finally be heard.